If there weren't so many buildings, we could see it from the office window. And all it has is just a landscape and a huge cathedral in the middle of the island.
Google announced that soon Android Studio would support Kotlin development out of the box.
We have never added a new programming language to Android.
Did you hear the crowd?
That was the loudest.
That was the loudest applause.
The most applause, by the way, by far, was for Kotlin.
The story of Kotlin starts, I'm not sure I remember the exact year, I think it was the end of 2009. This started with the conversation that I had with our CEO back then, with Sergey Dmitriev. Back then we have been building tools for programming languages for like 9 years or roughly about that. And we were always building tools for technologies that produced by other companies. So we did not have our own language, we did not have our own frameworks, and we did not have our own technology stack. And basically I thought like that it would be really nice, really interesting if we could do something more than just building tools, if we could just do something that actually moves the industry forward. And so that's how I came up with the idea that maybe we could build a programming language. So then some more conversations happened. Max Shafirov got involved very early into the discussions of the language. And soon after that, we got to know Andrei Breslov.
So please help me welcome the lead language designer for Kotlin, Andrei Breslov.
Thanks for a great introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm very glad to see you here. Today I'm gonna talk about what can it be? Kotlin, I guess. Yeah, I told this story many times already. So I was very skeptical. Like from the very beginning of this conversation, I was very skeptical. You know, it's a fairly well-known, like common sense thing that you shouldn't make new languages. Like it's a hopeless thing.
I joined Kotlin team very early, I think in 2011, when there were very few people there and a lot of skepticism also. Some skepticism inside JetBrains and outside JetBrains. And I remember this startup feeling when we were doing something great, but many people wouldn't understand why was the purpose, why it can succeed, and so on.
By that time, I was already into languages. I did a lot of domain-specific languages. My PhD was about domain-specific languages. Actually, my master's thesis was on domain-specific languages as well. I assumed it was a conversation about a domain-specific language project that JetBrains was running for a while, MPS, which is a very interesting experimental system. And I was like, yeah, I'll be in St. Petersburg at some point. So at that time, I was a visiting PhD student in Tartu. Yeah, I will be in St. Petersburg. I will just pop into the office and we'll have a chat.
Creating a programming language is, on one side, deceptively simple. There are lots of books on how you create your own language, and that's for a software developer a fun thing to do. You can do it as your pet project, create your own programming languages. I mean, it's all more or less standard computer science.
So basically what a programming language is, it's an interface for a programmer to capture some ideas in a way that a computer can execute. So it's not for a computer to understand, it's for a computer to execute precisely. So through a programming language, you tell the machine what to do in a very precise way. But what machines do ultimately is, of course, manipulations of like binary code, right? Binary values. And you don't want to tell it like flip this 1 to 0 because it will be an incredibly long instruction, like what you want it to do. And this is why modern languages are what's called high-level languages, because we are describing things on a higher level of abstraction, much higher than what the machine actually does.
It's easy to create a toy language for yourself. Like some people do it as their university project.
Nowadays, with the tools that people have now, a simple programming language can be created just in a matter of a few weeks.
That's all you need, right? You start working on it, you sketch some syntax on a sheet of paper, you're excited, you just start generating the parser, and then you can use this passion and interest to actually implement a compiler of some sort. But that's nowhere near a complete language on the one hand.
You have to have a good quality compiler, you have to have documentation, you have to have some tools.
Debuggers, profilers, libraries, integrations.
Everything from libraries to build tools to IDs to documentation and lots of examples and Stack Overflow, and nowadays ChatGPT needs to speak and so on and so forth. So it's like having a compiler is very far from enough.
And this can very quickly grow to a sizable project.
And creating all of that takes a lot of resources and quite a big team to accomplish.
So basically, it's an incredibly expensive project with a very low chance of success, even if you get all the technical things right. I mean, if it's your hobby and you just want to have fun, okay, but if you want it to be used by a lot of people, just don't do it.
In 2010 to approximately 2015, I don't remember the exact date. I mean, by most metrics, Java was the most popular language. It was widely taught in universities and widely used on backend.
Mobile development was much less of a thing, so my memory is a little bit fuzzy on that, whether we had iPhones already back then. I think we did.
The best Android phones of the year, I'd say the Samsung Galaxy S, the Droid X, and that Nexus 1 and Nexus S. Good work, Google.
It's going to be well received, my opinion. We'll see whether that's this big or this big or this big. I don't know yet.
It was a period of changes in mobile development because I'm a mobile guy, and I remember that BlackBerry was still one of the players.
Stop asking for a recommendation between BlackBerries because we can't tell them apart.
Probably it was near the death of the BlackBerry OS, but my first job was to port BlackBerry Java programs to Android, for example. And we used Java there and Java on Android. It was quite interesting.
And most of the enterprise development was much less front-end heavy than it is today. So there was, of course, already JavaScript and jQuery, but the modern frameworks such as React did not exist back then. And so a much larger percentage of the code of every enterprise application was executed on the server rather than on the client.
Number one, the perceived popularity of jQuery is pervasive. The perceived ease of use.
Java was a thing, .NET was a thing, native development was a thing, C++.
The new Skype app for the PlayStation Vita. As you can see, it's been custom tailored to the PlayStation Vita's unique UI and makes full use of the 5-inch OLED display.
By 2010, I think the up-to-date version of Java then was something like Java 6, or maybe Java 7 was right around the corner. And that wasn't a big update to the language. Like the actual meaningful, very interesting features that were delivered to Java last were delivered back in 2004 with Java 5.
I think that at that point, especially in the JVM world, in the Java world, there were a lot of discussions about alternatives to Java, mainly because Java was kind of a bit stagnating. There were many options of what can be better than Java. And at that point, it was like, I think, main competition between Scala, Groovy, and some others. Like at that point, there was Ceylon as well.
If you go back to the internet in that time and see what people wrote, actually quite prominent people in Java community were discussing deficiencies of Java, that Java is quite old. It was more than 20 years by that time. It was already obvious that it lacks some modern things people expect to, and some of its design choices had proved already over 20 years had proved itself not to be correct.
There was lack of features, lack of some conciseness, and to some extent it's still there. So it's like people saw how you can write code in Scala, and there's like, okay, why can't we do the same in Java? Why do we have to write that much more code in Java for the same use case? And to some extent, it's still there. So, for instance, you can't just throw away the language syntax and replace it with something else. For instance, with compulsory variable types. I mean, like in Java, you very often you have like variable name that duplicates the variable type, then goes the same variable type, and then goes the function like get the same variable type, whatever, blah 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 handler, and it's like it's just repeating this name 3 times.
As an Android developer, I wouldn't say that Java stagnated back in the days, but we couldn't use some fresh features. On Android platform, we couldn't use new version of Java. And that was the main reason. And because of this, we had to use some strange workarounds like retro lambda library, like Gradle plugin, which just transforms all your code.
As a Java developer who works in enterprise, I knew back then that in our Java code bases, the major source of problems that we run into with our Java code was null pointer exception. And that was not just my experience, that was the experience of every Java enterprise shop, and people were invented horrible design principles to avoid those null pointer exceptions. Java had lots of known problems in its design, and Kotlin was all about solving those problems.
Yeah, it was my idea for JetBrains to build a programming language. The specific language that we built, like how it was shaped and what it looked like, was actually most of these decisions were made by other people. So my role was kind of just the initial push.
Every popular language is breaking this rule of never create a new language. And popular languages are relatively few. I think it was either Sergei Dmitriev or Max Shafirov who convinced me that a new language was actually needed by the market, that there was a niche, a window of opportunity that we could actually use and put out a language that has a chance of being really successful, and that JetBrains was in a good position to do that. This was a long conversation, and it ended with, like, I was completely convinced that yes, the language is needed, and we were already brainstorming some ideas for the design. On that same first day, we, like, on the whiteboard, there were some sketches of the syntax, so on and so forth. So it was sort of a very quick transition from, no, this is a very bad idea, to, okay, let's do it. It was a long conversation. I think I showed up at like 6, and when I was going back, I was trying to catch the last train on the subway, so it was near midnight. And I did realize that there was a very huge risk of just, wide adoption not happening. It was very clear to me, even then at the beginning, and I was 26 by that time, so I had I was overly self-confident, but even then I realized that, this may not work out. Maybe we make a language and nobody cares. Maybe we make a language and it's not good. It's the first big language I was designing, so I had no idea if it would work out. But it felt like there was a need in the market, A, and B, it was worth a shot because I myself would learn a lot from this, would try something really big, something that I will be designing from scratch, and it's an incredibly appealing proposition. You will be given all the resources to try and create a language from scratch, and not a hobby language that nobody is going to care about, but a language that has a shot at becoming really big.
I heard about it from Andrei Brislav. I made my bachelor and master degrees with him, so he was my advisor for both degrees. And after I finished the university, made my master, I was like, there is this cool project. Can I join or something like this?
First steps in designing Kotlin were basically just lots of discussions. I think for about 6 months, all we did was talking.
My advice back then was, okay, let's not just create a new language, but make sure we solve the problem of null pointer exception in the language. And again, it was not a groundbreaking idea. Back then, there were a number of research languages who have successfully solved this problem.
So like the key question would be, what do you wish Java had?
Most of the things, actually, if you look at the Kotlin design, again, most of the things were there publicly, being publicly discussed by people. There were blog posts, people were kind of listing deficiencies of Java. And what basically Kotlin did, it took those to the design table and basically made a goal of making sure that all the existing weak spots of Java get addressed. An obvious idea was, let's create a language where the right things you can easily do, and that's the bad things you can't do. So again, the whole idea was there on the surface. Of course, implementation is that what matters.
Our goal with Kotlin was never like to break completely new ground. So a lot of the ideas in Kotlin come from languages that existed before it.
Two main languages Kotlin was inspired with were Java and C#.
Scala was a very big influence. So I would put it on the second place after Java. So Java was the biggest influence on Kotlin, and Scala was next, and we took a lot of ideas from it.
The coroutine design, which is a big part of the Kotlin's feature set, was very heavily inspired by .NET, and actually many other languages have a similar design now. The syntax for passing lambdas to a function where you can put the lambda outside of the parentheses of a method, this was taken pretty much exactly from Groovy.
It took the idea of in-language DSLs from Groovy, and Groovy at that time was dynamic language without static type system, and adapted it to a statically typed language, and that was pretty unique. So it's actually a really radical idea that lets you kind of create new languages inside Kotlin, which is called domain-specific languages, and makes solving things in Kotlin in many cases easier and more straightforward than how you do it in other languages.
Many ideas were taken from Python, things like delegated properties, so on and so forth. So we were taking good ideas everywhere we can find them, and like smartcasts, I think, were inspired by a language, not so well-known language called Gosu, and so on and so forth. So there were interesting ideas we were collecting together, but it's not like you can just look at how it's done in another language and use it like one-to-one, because fitting features together is the hard part of it all.
The harder thing is not what features to add. The hardest decision is what features not to add, because you want your core language to be small enough so to make it easier for people to understand.
It was another period in the programming language history where you could take some more ideas from the academic papers that were like incredibly convenient for programmers, but weren't practical for languages of the 90s. So in 2010s, you could use things that were understood by researchers 20 years before that, 30 years before that. But only then it was possible to actually execute them in an efficient way. So this was what Kotlin was doing. We're taking ideas from basically 70s and 80s and 90s that there lived only in academic papers and academic languages, and putting them into mainstream.
when I first saw Kotlin, it still didn't have a name. It was still called Jet.
For several years, the packages in the Kotlin repository had this Jet, was started with, I don't know, JetBrains.jet. And there were some people in the community asking, like, what's this Jet?
And so, like, at some point, Sergei Dmitriev just came to my desk and basically said that we need a name for the language. And this was, of course, not the first time that we had this discussion. This was discussed many times before, but he said just, we need a name for the language. And he was just standing there and not leaving. And I kind of thought that he would not leave until I have a name for him. And I thought that, yeah, well, Java is a language, Java is an island, Ceylon is an island, so we have an island of our own, which is called Kotlin.
Let's name a language also after an island.
And it's not just confrontation with Java, it's because K goes after J. So it's so the name has to start with the next letter after J, not just to be an island.
There is a place called Kotlin in Poland that also makes ketchup. So sometimes I get souvenirs from people from Poland just bringing me bottles of ketchup.
One of the Kotlin design goals was interoperability with Java. The team not only wanted to create a new, better language than Java, the team wanted to create a language in which the code you write in Kotlin can nicely coexist with the existing Java code and libraries that you have. So you can use existing Java tooling for it. And that made design of them really complicated. It made finding the right solution really complicated.
To make that work, you have to integrate with the entire Java ecosystem, with every tool that works with Java. You need to integrate in one way or another. So it's a pretty convoluted process to get Kotlin work with Java very well in every aspect of the Java ecosystem.
I don't remember that we actually did have a big roadmap.
I think there was a roadmap, but I think it was mostly in Andrew Belsa's head originally.
Essentially, we had the design and we had to make sure that all the parts of the design were implemented and working and correct. And a lot of the evolution after that was like feedback driven or driven by issues that we knew to be unresolved. And but this was all very informal, and I think the formal roadmap process, like right now Kotlin has a public roadmap, but I think this was a change that happened in the last 3 years or something like that.
I was basically putting together a list of things we could address and how we can address them and so on and so forth. I was looking into that for a while, and there were two or three internal presentations when we just gave an internal talk to everybody interested in JetBrains, and people were asking questions and giving me feedback, and it was very helpful actually to just clean up the design a little bit and find issues that we didn't address.
Kotlin was through 2010 to somewhere around 15 was done by a pretty small team at JetBrains in its initial conceptual phases, and it was kind of slow. But at the same time, the team was small, so it wasn't big investment initially.
There were a few folks who were working on the compiler, a few folks working on the tools. Like the compiler team was so Stas Yerokhin, who has been working on Kotlin since then, and who I think who was like the manager of the Kotlin team for some time. He was like one of the key developers on the front end. Sasha Udalov was working on the back end, along with Dima Petrov, and I think there were a bunch of other people. I probably don't remember everyone.
Andrei Breslov was team lead. He was, managing the whole team and driving the language evolution.
So we had very good people, but everybody was part-time, and there was like very little full-time focus in the project. And we didn't bring many people from across JetBrains to work on this. So a few people joined, but we weren't actively recruiting people from around JetBrains, and we weren't actively recruiting experienced compiler engineers from outside JetBrains.
There are experts in compiler development. You can find them, but they're very far. It's a niche job. But on the other side, everyone, when you're studying university and you study software engineering or computer science in university, that's one of the most obvious subjects that every student go through is how to design and write a compiler. It's usually the course on compiler creation. Every student has it in university.
Hiring students and fresh graduates is like something everybody does, of course, because getting good people is difficult. Also, I had a lot of experience working with students. I knew like how to tell a good student apart, how to work with a student. So it was like my strong side. And also, it was probably just my bias. I knew how to do that. I had access to a lot of students. And I think it's a very good idea to have young, bright people who have a lot of energy on the team, and it pays off.
Young people writing modern language, which is pretty fitting because we're writing a modern language in Kotlin is designed to be a modern language.
But I guess our problem was lack of balance. We had too many junior developers and too few experienced people who did production compilers before. So that was a mistake. And I think we could have made the first release a lot sooner if we had more experienced people on the team. And to a large extent, it's a product of myself not being an experienced manager when we started. I was 26, I never managed a team, but I thought I knew how to do everything because I thought management was like teaching, which it isn't. I mean, it has similar aspects, but it's absolutely not the same. So I didn't realize I didn't know how to do it. I was doing it in a way that felt right, and I was completely wrong. I was micromanaging everybody. I didn't know how to hire people. I didn't know what kind of people I needed to hire. So a lot of mistakes in assembling the team. We ended up getting very bright people, and the team now is very strong.
It would have been in... Yes, it would have been in 2014. So I'd been working in Java up to that point, but was getting tired of the syntax and its sort of fussiness, and it's quite verbose. I liked a lot of the things about the ecosystem, but the language was getting a bit annoying. So I looked around for a better JVM language, basically. I looked at Scala, and I looked at Ceylon, which at the time was a Red Hat project that was kind of competing with Kotlin early on. And I found Kotlin somehow, I don't remember how, just found a blog post about it or something from JetBrains. And at the time, there was no website. There was just a Confluence wiki page that was like publicly readable. And it described, this language, which I thought sounded interesting. And I tried them all out, but decided early on that Kotlin was the one I liked, partly because I was already an IntelliJ user and Kotlin worked very well with that. And so I started using Kotlin around M10 or something like that, so the language wasn't stable at that point.
We have some people who even put into their biography, I started to use Kotlin when interfaces were called traits. Or I started to use Kotlin from this M10 version. They were milestone versions. So it's like there were a set of milestones getting closer to the final release.
My first impression about Kotlin was it looks like Java. It feels a little bit like Java. It was very understandable for me. But at the same time, I found a lot of interesting features, something fresh.
Andrei Breslov came to me one day and he said, hey, so I've been accepted to speak at a conference in the US. It's called OSCON. And they want me to give a talk about Kotlin. I can't go. Can you go? And I said, well, I don't even know what Kotlin is or how it's related, or I'm a .NET developer and this is JVM. So my journey with Kotlin started there. Learning Kotlin in 1 month and going into a presentation about it. So yeah, that's a little bit about my background and how it relates to Kotlin.
Why are you here, apart from the awesome title? Like, is it to learn functional programming? Is it to learn Kotlin?
I was given a room of 800 people at OSCON. And OSCON, it was back then, I don't think it exists anymore, but it was a pretty big conference, right? It was O'Reilly's open source conference. And I think around 9 people showed up. So I'm in this massive room and only 9 people there. And so I'm giving this talk, and the general question starts to pop up. It's like, well, why not Scala? This looks a little bit like Scala. And why this? And why that? And you got to understand that while I am and was even more back then a software developer, I didn't know the ins and outs of the JVM. I didn't know a lot of things. And I was basically given 1.5 months to learn Kotlin, learn the JVM, and prepare a talk. So it was kind of challenging, right? Some of the questions that were being asked were challenging.
So of course, when you're starting a project like that, like the main doubt is that no one is going to use the language. So like, for example, we got quite a bit of pushback from the users of Scala, who thought that, yeah, well, Scala actually solves all the problems that Kotlin is intended to solve. And if Scala doesn't do something exactly right, then JetBrains should contribute to Scala so that these problems could be fixed inside the Scala language. And so why, like, they should not bother with building their own language. And of course, there were also worries that they are just building, like, no one should use Kotlin because Kotlin is built for for JetBrains to sell more IDs. So that, like, you should avoid the lock-in to JetBrains IDs, and because of that, you should not use Kotlin. For some people, that was a concern.
It was, different kinds of feedback. Some people wanted features and were, right, I want this and that feature. And most of the time, this kind of feedback non-constructive, but it still gives you food for thought, like what's people missing.
I mean, I think the Java community was a little bit split, and still is. First of all, it wasn't just the Java community, it was also the Groovy community and the Scala community. When we introduced Kotlin, and then there was another language, I don't know if you recall, it was called Ceylon, which we actually had tried to work with initially, but they wanted to go a different direction than we did. But so in the Java community, those folks that had adopted Scala would look down on Kotlin generally, like saying, this is just a dumber version of Scala, which is why I used to make the joke initially when I used to present Kotlin and say, well, Kotlin is Scala for Dummies. The For Dummies series books, right? It's so I used to say Kotlin is Scala for Dummies. No disrespect to folks adopting Kotlin, including myself, but it was in line of that book.
The core problem that Kotlin and other JVM languages were trying to solve is, let's have a modern language that works with Java ecosystem, that is better than Java, or not probably works with Java ecosystem, but better language for the JVM platform. And then the core difference with Scala was that Scala wanted to reinvent the world with its own standard library, with its own ecosystem, with its own library, and they were more interested in a little bit of academic approach. Okay, what can be done with this new language on the JVM? What can be the future of programming, and so on and so forth. And in our case, that were all the reasons why at JetBrains they couldn't use Scala. They wanted to, but then it was one of the reasons why they started Kotlin in the first place, because they wanted to have a better language to write IntelliJ on. And at that point, as I said, Java was stagnating, and they considered Scala, but Scala wasn't a good fit to mix with Java, with existing Java code, with existing Java libraries.
What is your favorite non-Java JVM language?
So that one's a pretty easy one, and that's Clojure.
Oh, there's at least one person in chat who's going to be very, very happy with that answer.
And the reason for that is, I think Clojure is one of the few production quality serious JVM languages that isn't just, let's do Java better.
Even though it does want to become a better Java, but it does not do so by adding Java with more features. The way is different. Like, even the way you declare functions in them is different, very different. Like, you put types in different places, you declare different. So a different language that is designed to be better than Java.
And so, the folks in the Java community that were like, no, we want everything functional, and we want to do the whole FP and to hell with object-oriented programming. they were basically in the Scala camp. Then there were folks that were looking at Kotlin and saying, well, looks a lot like Groovy, and you can add an annotation to make Groovy statically typed, so why are you doing this? And then there was a small portion of folks in the Java community saying, hey, this is kind of nice, right? It's reducing amount of boilerplate code, and I like how this feature works, and I like that little feature, and I'm going to start trying it.
I did different talks at the time at Java conference, and I remember many people coming to me afterwards. It's like, yes, that makes sense. It's like before the release, it was always like, okay, let's see how it all evolves. But still, there was signs of understanding what's it all about.
What impressed me the most was that even though the language had almost no users and wasn't at version 1 yet, and so the syntax and semantics kept changing, every time I upgraded to a new Kotlin release, there were like inspections in the IDE that would port my code for me to the new version. And so I felt immediately this gave me a tremendous sense of confidence.
A lot of things that we had in the works, we had to stop working on, but we needed to stop it in a way that we can continue later. And the thing with languages is, if you put something out and people start using it, you can't take it back. Because if you take something back in the language, all the code that's out there will break.
So no features disappeared, luckily. I don't recall ever betting on a feature and then it vanished. That would have been really painful. But that never happened, right? There were challenges early on with bugs. So that showed through in things like compiler bugs occasionally, or crashes, or cases where the IDE would show good code red, for example, or red code would actually compile. The way annotations work changed. In modern Kotlin, they look the same as in Java. They work the same way. But in the early Kotlins, annotations, they didn't have an at in front of them, and they were designed to look like user-specified keywords, actually. And I remember when that got taken out, Andre, one of the reasons I started to like this guy is he posted a blog post where he sort of poured his heart out a bit, and he said, I've worked so hard on this feature. I really fell in love with this idea of being able to really extend the language fluently through these annotations that all work a bit like keywords. And, it was so nice and it was elegant, but we took it out because we couldn't make the IDE fast enough with that feature. And, that really drove it home to me that these guys, this team, like Andre, is thinking about every aspect simultaneously.
And that was quite an intense process. We spent lots of time reviewing the design and doing everything like that.
I remember the team was always stressed out that they had to release it soon. It's not yet there. So it's there was a lot of, and I remember I had this strange feeling because I was going to conferences, and at the conference usually there were people super happy, super enthusiastic about Kotlin. Or probably only those who will come to me after my talks to share the excitement. And then I went back to the office and saw these faces, under stress, that we need to release, we have so many problems. We have a special Kotlin cons for you. It takes something about 6 hours to complete them. So there is a project with some tasks to accomplish. And then you can download and actually fix all tests. And after 6 hours of hard work, you will be able to say, yes, I know Kotlin.
Kotlin was always open to other users, right? Kotlin was envisioned, designed as a general purpose language. General purpose means you can use it everywhere. It just, the original focus of the team was the thing where people did experiments, were in the backend or desktop. Because again, that was the kind of code that was there at JetBrains, and that's what people experimented with and discussed on the design.
And we were mainly targeting industrial developers, enterprise developers, server-side developers, people who wrote Java in 2010.
This is the last session before you guys get your new toys. Android development devices, right? That's what you're going to use them for, right? So we're going to make sure we finish on time and you guys can rush down and pick them up.
I think it was 2012 or something. Somebody asked a question in our forum.
Hey, I tried to use Kotlin to compile some code from Android, and I ran into this compiler bug.
Does Kotlin even work on Android? And I was like, I don't know.
Probably, you can try, it should work, but please try.
I was not really keenly aware of Android. I knew there was this interesting new platform that Google was putting out, but I've never looked into it. I heard that it used Java. I didn't even know how it was implemented there.
Originally, Kotlin was not planned as a mobile development language. So the interest in mobile development came up later because users were interested in it. Users were interested in getting a better language. And I guess that mobile users were all in all less conservative, less set in their ways compared to like backend developers who also used a lot of Java. And so they were more open to trying out a new language, and Kotlin was the language that they wanted to try.
Yeah, somebody tried at some point, and it turned out that nothing worked at all. Like the code didn't even run because there was some segmentation fault, which crashed from somewhere inside the Android toolchain. And we were like, okay, now what?
There were no mobile developers in the team, and nobody thought that we were doing mobile development language. It happened. The adoption of Kotlin on mobile for Android was kind of accident. What community brought to Kotlin, not the part of its original design.
And the team looked at it and they're like, okay, well, this isn't the big issue. We can fix that. And we did.
Turned out that the Android toolchain itself crashed. The DEX, it's a translator from the Java bytecodes to Dalvik bytecodes. Android has its own virtual machine that's sort of compatible to Java but doesn't use the same bytecodes. So this translator, written in C or C++, just crashed, fell into a core dump. And that was what we got, like a core dump with just a bunch of registers. And I guess some diagnostics about some kind of flags not matching. We realized that this one was a problem in our compiler. We were actually writing some flags onto our classes that were not legal for Java. And at that point, it was quite clear that the world is not as nice and simple as we thought, because we were running Kotlin on the hotspot VM from Oracle that was, back in the day, developed alongside the Java language specification. And it was not implemented like word to word to the spec. Because, again, a lot of that code just predated the spec. So Hotspot didn't care about some minute discrepancies from the spec that we had in our compiler. But Android was written later, and they cared about every detail. They actually read the spec and implemented everything.
And we looked at it, and yeah, there's a compiler bug. We are going to fix it. Here, have the fix. You can try it again. And the person said, oh yeah, something's working now. And this is basically how Kotlin for Android support started.
Noise that the Android community was making, noise in a nice way, but like there was so much talk about Android and Android and Android and Android that it ended up actually kind of backfiring for us, because people started to think that Kotlin is just an Android language, that the only thing you can do with Kotlin is mobile development.
I associated this language with the mobile, and I didn't try to use it for some other platforms.
This wasn't a vector as such. So mobile development was not like a big area of investment for us or something like that. So we were still building Kotlin as a language for everyone, for backend developers and for mobile developers as well. And for a long time, we had like 1 or 2 people working on Android specific. Yes, we were getting users there. We were addressing the pain points of those users, but it's not like we were just officially saying that this is our main target audience now and we have to deprioritize other directions.
Of course, Android community was happy because Kotlin is great programming language which brings a lot of interesting features which we can use right now without any issues out of the box. And like Kotlin was like fresh breath of air.
And later on, I realized that Android was a very interesting market for Kotlin, because my idea was that mobile applications are often created from scratch. There are many more smaller projects and new projects started from scratch. And it's much easier to adopt a new language when you start from scratch than if you compare that to already having a code base and a team working on a code base. Introducing a new language is much more of a challenge. So I made a bet to support Android well to target this specific use case. You start a new application from scratch, and this makes adoption of a new language much easier. It turned out this factor wasn't very important, but Android was an important platform. So I'm very happy I made the decision back in 2013, 14, probably 2014. Yeah.
It was the perfect fit for that time because they also wanted a modern language, a new language, and new features in the language. If they could use Java 8, probably the demand would be lower. But because they could not, they still wanted to have joy from the development, to be able to use new features that other ecosystem and other languages were talking about a lot. There was this clear demand.
So the community started to grow. And then what happened is that, people started to get interested in Kotlin on the Android side. And then there was this famous paper by Jake Wharton, who I'm sure you know, that's well known in the Android community. And he wrote this long white paper about how he was proposing and wanting to adopt Kotlin at Square, which is now named Block.
And at that point, because he was very well known in the Android community, and his opinion, many people listened to his opinion, it strengthened a lot our message. So this one kind of not luck, but kind of luck that at this point they made this decision. Because if they haven't done this, if they made a different one, if they decided just to stick with Java using, some improvements, some libraries, there might not have been this outcome.
And at some point I remember I had created a Slack channel for this product that we have now, which is called Ktor. And I said, maybe we should generalize this Slack and rename it and open it up to Kotlin, not just Ktor, which we did. So we went over and then suddenly it started to grow. And right now, I think we've got something like 67 or 68,000 people on the Kotlin Slack.
And of course, some of these users got interested in Kotlin because they're longtime fans of the company and they were interested in everything that the company used to build. But I kind of think that most of the early promotion outside of JetBrains was done by people new to this whole thing, who were probably IntelliJ users, but were not as active in the IntelliJ user community, but were just started the community activities when they started using Kotlin.
On many occasions when I was asked, when are you going to release 1.0? And I was like, at least a year from now. And this at least a year from now was repeated year after year, of course, because this is not a plan, right?
I was the person because we wanted to have released earlier. And I sometimes say that I'm the person who was promising the first Kotlin release in a year for 3 years, something like this. So it's I remember going to the conference and saying what? When do you expect the first release of Kotlin, the stable release of Kotlin? It's probably in a year and a half. And then a year and a half passes and there was still no release, but then I still continued. It's probably in a year.
By 2015, we basically just realized, okay, we have to start wrapping things up to put it out next year. And next year, the date wasn't set, really. We just started wrapping things up. Fast forward to 2016. I was excited, and it was an absolutely crazy process, but it worked. In a year, we did release 1.0. And, as it usually happens, the compiler that we were releasing, it was initially written as a prototype. So the idea back in 2010 and 2011 was let's prototype a compiler quickly and see how things work, and then just throw it away and write a good compiler from scratch. Of course, that very prototype is what everybody's using today. So the new compiler, K2, is around the corner. It's almost done, but it was only started, I don't remember exactly when, 2018, 2019. But the idea was to do it in 2012, and it never happened, of course, because it never happens. So that's another strategic mistake that I made.
Andrei promised it how many years ago, and it's only now here. And then you can ask, okay, why it took so long to release the first version of Kotlin? Why it takes so long to release the second version of Kotlin? I don't know, it takes time. It's not an easy project.
So yeah, in 2016, we released that prototype compiler as the production version, of course. And the entire year, 2016, was spent, of course, fixing bugs and then like addressing lots of issues, as it usually is with fresh software. Yeah, it was quite an interesting time. So, as for now, we have 1.0, actually 1.02, as the main release, and our development is in 2 lines. So we have those incremental updates, 1.02, 1.03, so on and so forth, which are source compatible, which means that language doesn't change modular bugs. We fix bugs in the compiler. This sometimes slightly changes the language, but that's always for the better, believe me. There was this illusion that as soon as we release 1.0, something's going to change. But obviously, this is not what happens usually, because after 1.0, we started getting bug reports from more people.
We look at feedback people give, and there were cases where it led us to reconsidering the design.
And it was a rush to fix at least the critical ones, because there were things that people just couldn't compile their code, or their code didn't run or something like that. So it was a push for 1.0.1, 1.0.2, so updates that fixed critical bugs. And it was like a never-ending treadmill.
Which led us to reconsider our approaches to quality assurance, making sure we better test it before we release it.
Like, you have to fix issues in the existing code, you have to work on the new features that were planned, and it was just an everlasting process.
There was we released them experimental, people critiqued it, said that, pointed out things that were not working, were really nice, and led us to revisit this idea and implement it in a different way.
By the time we released, it was pretty clear that something was not right in how the team was managed. So I think it was about 30-something people in the team by that time. And I was basically micromanaging everybody without realizing I was doing that. And it wasn't working very well. I was overloaded, I couldn't write any code. And actually, I basically gave up writing code close to the release and never wrote any production code in Kotlin after that.
Kotlin team since 1.0, since the moment I joined, Kotlin team grew rapidly. It started really small team with some separation, but there were not even formal groups or teams inside.
And yeah, it was a lot of organizational debt in how the team was run. And it was a slow process of realization that we need to change how it is and create sub-teams and do other things. It was pretty difficult.
It all started splitting into compiler team, into IDE team, into infrastructure teams. Then, there appeared a formal quality assurance team.
So in this sense, there was this kind of technical process, designing the language, implementing the features, talking to the users, presenting about the language all over the world. All that was going on, but there was also this undercurrent of restructuring the team. And it went on for a while because I didn't know how to do it. We only figured it out years later. There was just a little bit to celebrate and then just get back to work.
As developers, we get the best work done when we just have the opportunity to sit down undistracted and get into the flow. Context switching greatly reduces our efficiency, and it can cause us a lot of frustration. How many of you would love to work in a world where you get to work in a consistent, expressive, concise, and fun programming language all day, both for the app development you do, as well as the tools to build it? I know I would. Today I'm going to walk you through this funner new language that some of you may have heard about by now called Kotlin, and how it can help make your life a little bit better and more consistent throughout the entire development stack.
Ever since we released 1.0, we were oscillating between 2 biggest issues. It's one or the other that's the hottest at the moment, and when you fix one, you get back to the other. It's IDE performance, how quickly everything response in the IDE, and build performance, how quickly you can get an executable when you submit your code. So both weren't great, and our initial goal was to match Java more or less on both, and it's incredibly difficult. Kotlin is a more complicated language than Java, and also just we didn't pay enough attention to it from the beginning. We didn't measure our performance from the beginning, and it was only later on when we realized that performance is something we really need to address, and was very difficult to do it with an existing code base. So it was an issue from the beginning, and we were kind of taking the hottest one, like the kind of users the build is the slowest for, trying to help them when they are not really happy, but like not as much pain as they used to be. We switched to IDE and fixed things there, so on and so forth. So we were kind of oscillating between the two for a long time. And of course, underlying this was incremental compilation for the builds, which is very important in the development process. Was like the feedback loop that the developer is working in is you write some code, you want to run it as quickly as possible. And if compilation takes a long time, that breaks your feedback loop, and you have to wait, and you have to go and get some coffee, and your train of thought is gone, and your context is gone. So yeah, we were investing quite a bit in incremental compilation, and it's a very complicated algorithm with a lot of issues integrating with the build system, because we were also transitioning from something built into IntelliJ IDEA called JPS onto Gradle. We're trying to do something in Maven as well. Maven is not very well suited for incremental compilation. So there were lots and lots of technical challenges around that. Also, our prototype compiler wasn't very good for performance in the IDE, so there were constant issues with IDE stuff. So these things were constantly bugging us, and this is why the team is working on the new compiler that will solve a lot of these issues. And also, like, this is why a lot of optimization work went into Kotlin Gradle integration, both on the Gradle side and the Kotlin side. It's been a huge project.
And in 2014, I found Kotlin, and I remember like the front page of Kotlin had these sneakers on the photo. It's like, God, this is not professional. But this coming from JetBrains, so I will take a look at it.
I like Kotlin website used to be on Confluence, and when I started to do like some helping with product marketing, I put it over outside of Confluence, and I was looking for some hipster style image, and I found those sneakers.
One of our targets, one of our goals was to try and get some content published around Kotlin. And so I had spoken for a long time to O'Reilly, the same folks that had OSCON, and tried to convince them for them to allow me to do a course on their platform. Back then it was called Safari. And eventually I managed to convince them, and I created an 8-hour course on Safari, which still exists, it's still there, teaching the fundamentals and advanced things in terms of Kotlin. And I remember, I was getting a number of views on this, right? It wasn't massive. And my editor at the time, they were like, well, it's kind of like what we expected.
And we definitely wanted more. We realized like the whole Java space was in millions of developers, and we wanted to get to that. And it was pretty clear that Android developers suffered even more than regular Java developers, because Android was stuck in Java 6. They didn't even get properly to use Java 8 features. So they were still 10-ish years back, basically, stuck with a language from about 10 years ago. It turned out that actual Android developers were really happy to use Kotlin in their projects, and they loved it. But a lot of people were complaining about being unsure whether Kotlin keeps working on Android. But because what if Google changes something in their platform and Kotlin stops working, for example? And people really wanted asked to get an endorsement from Google to just reassure them and make it easier to adopt the new language in their apps. And we were trying to approach Google in different ways. JetBrains and Google had a good relationship working on the same platform for our IDEs. Android Studio was based on a JetBrains IDE. And it was going on for a while by that time. Yeah, so we tried to contact people at Google and it didn't work. Like we didn't get any response for a while.
The first involvement, there was this guy called Yigit Boyar. I don't know if he's still at Google. And I think he was the first Googler who actually tried to do things with Android.
In terms of Google, okay, so the thing is, I do believe I have the first Kotlin commit in Android.
Wow,
so
really?
I'm super proud of. I mean, didn't fact check, but it's very, very unlikely someone else merged the Kotlin code before I did.
But then one day, we got a phone call from people we didn't work with on the Android side. And they wanted to talk to us about this idea of supporting Kotlin as an officially supported language on the Android platform and announcing that at Google I/O 2017, which was 3 months from that call. So it was pretty clear that the timeline was very short. We were incredibly excited. This is what we wanted all along. It happened in the spring 2017. It was already a year that Kotlin was out. And yeah, it was an exciting moment, but we realized it was a huge amount of work to get it done by the conference.
And that was the most intense period, I think, in my career at JetBrains. It was just like it was a roller coaster of up and downs. That it was also one of the most exciting periods, and we can't say anything to anyone. Like even inside JetBrains, it was limited to maybe like, I don't know, 5-6 people.
I think it was really hard to get everything ready on time, especially with the foundation and with the trademarks. There were, I think, Max and Andre had to like cancel and reschedule their flights to Mountain View to San Francisco a couple of times while the discussions were ongoing, like how are we doing this, how are we not doing this, how are we announcing that, how are we announcing this later. This was frustrating.
If you think about the position Google was in back then, it's a pretty difficult position because this famous lawsuit that Oracle started against Google for using Java was still going on. So we've, as Google, we've used another company's language before and see what happened. We really don't want anything like that happening again.
Conspiracy theories are all over the place, right? I mean, and the best place to find conspiracy theories is Hacker News or Reddit. And so when I look at some of every time there's some news or something around Kotlin or whatever, or someone writes some blog post about Kotlin, the first comment is always, oh yes, Kotlin was created by Google because they wanted to avoid any legal issues with Java and Oracle. And you're like, this is so far from the truth.
So what can we do? And it was a difficult process of figuring out the kind of legal things we need to sign, like the kind of arrangement we need to set up. And basically, this is when the blueprint for the Kotlin Foundation was drafted. So the idea was that nobody controls Kotlin on its own. Google and JetBrains are partnering in a foundation. The foundation will hold the trademark. And this is how Kotlin will be governed.
So, neither Google nor JetBrains owns Kotlin as a trademark. For example, there's a language committee in the foundation, which doesn't decide what features are going in the language, but does have a say over what breaking changes may or may not occur.
And then there is a very important question of how do you govern the foundation? Like what the board of directors is like. How does voting work on the board and so on and so forth? And it was a long legal document describing the voting procedures and the kinds of decisions that required simple majority and kinds of decisions that required super majority, like 2/3 of the board or something. And every time you change something in this kind of document, you need to check that everything else is consistent. And this is what we, like myself and my closest colleague Stasi Rochen, were doing together on a whiteboard, debugging this algorithm. Like, what if this happens? Like, and this party votes like this, and that party votes like this. Is it a problem? Is it okay? And we went through at least 3 rounds of this, I think. So it was pretty intense.
It was emotionally difficult because there was a lot of details that had to be sorted out.
How do we release new versions now that we have to integrate with Android Studio? Officially, we used to integrate on our side, but there were a lot of issues.
And I think it was then. Yeah, I think it was then that like the actual release of the actual build of the Android plugin that went into the first public version of Android Studio with Kotlin support. I think I compiled this version like at 1 a.m. lying in my bed in St. Petersburg apartment, just like on my laptop, and then sent it over by email to someone, and then went into the first build.
So how do we figure out the release process? What goes into the announcement? And all that was going on at the same time, and we had a hard deadline.
One day it would be like, we're not going to make it because we need to agree on this, and we don't have time, and it's not feasible.
Sitting in a room with Dave Burke, who leads Android engineering, and Dave was quiet as we walked through all of the data end to end, and he said at the end, on the one hand, this is a pretty big deal. On the other hand, this looks like an absolute no-brainer. Do you think we can pull it off for I/O?
And then 2 days later, folks getting on a call again and saying, no, look, we got to fix this. We got to make it happen. And we got to find our way around it. And we got to do something to make this happen. And so it was really a time that both Google and JetBrains, we just didn't want to give up. We really wanted to make it happen.
And the last bit was that Max Shafirov actually overnight flew to California to talk to Google's vice president, to just face to face, to establish a personal relationship of trust, because it was like signing papers is one thing, but like looking at a person is another thing. And it worked.
There is one more thing. One thing we think would be an incredible compliment to the story, and it is one thing our team has never done for developers. We have never added a new programming language to Android, and today we're making Kotlin an officially supported language in Android. So, Kotlin is what our developer community has already asked for. It makes developers so much more productive. It is fully Android runtime compatible. It is totally interoperable with your existing code. It has fabulous IDE support, and it's mature and production ready from day one.
And Google I/O 2017 is a day I'll never forget. There was this announcement, the developer keynote, that Kotlin is introduced to the Android platform. There was a huge ovation, and we were there in the amphitheater with Max, and it was incredible in terms of feeling the energy, feeling that it's actually happened. It was great.
They didn't invite Max on the stage. They should have. Yeah, I wasn't there back then.
I perfectly remember this day. Me and the rest of the team were watching this from the office, live translation. It was really, really exciting. It was, again, still one of the brightest memory of my years working at Kotlin.
I do remember. So I remember the time that Google announced that it was supporting Kotlin, and that was a huge relief for me personally because, I kind of bet the startup I was working at on Kotlin. And so the moment Google came out and said, this is our new language, I was like, okay, phew, right? Now that's like the seal of approval. No one else going to argue about this anymore. That was a bet that paid off. And it was great to see because I had sort of assumed that Google would do something dumb like go off and make their own language. That Google have made so many languages, I was sort of expecting them to not do that. So it was really fantastic to see that the Android team recognized something good when they saw it and, took that suggestion basically from their community.
I missed the keynote for I/O because at the time of the keynote, I was on a plane flying over. And I remember landing in Vancouver to connect to San Francisco. And, I went through immigration and I tweeted, I said, so did I miss anything? Because I knew what had happened, right? And everyone was like replying to me on Twitter, oh my God, congratulations and this and that. When Google made the announcement, we previously, a few months before, we had launched the idea of doing a conference called Kotlin Conf. And I think by that time we had sold like 150 tickets and we were aiming for about 1,000 people, optimistically.
And I remember after the announcement, the Kotlin Conf tickets were almost sold out, were sold out really fast, because we were planning Kotlin Conf conference, the first Kotlin Conf conference in San Francisco, and I remember the stories that after the announcement, the sales flashed up. Obviously, everyone was instantly surprised. Like, what it is Kotlin, what it is all about, and so on.
And then from there, it suddenly, we sold out. I mean, every Kotlin Conf we sold out. And then Coursera coming and other publishers coming and saying, yes, please, we want more content on Kotlin. And then we saw an influx of books being published and courses.
Now we have this huge problem after something. It was very helpful for us that Google adopted Kotlin on Android and make it later default language for Android and supports it very much. But as consequences of this is that many people would say that Kotlin is now for mobile only, for Android only, and that's it. Yes, this is our problem that for instance, I and my team struggle very much with and try to reinforce the community that the language has never been only for Android. Yes, we have many Android users and a lot of hype probably is more connected with Android, but there are also a lot of server-side users.
It's not just about people using your tool anymore, but it's like you have actually created an entire ecosystem and are contributing to other people benefiting from this ecosystem, not just from building things with the language, but in doing courses, training, consulting. I was one time in India and a person came up to me and they said, we were doing this event in India, and they came up to me and they said, I was out of work. I had no understanding of software development or anything. And I watched your talk from Google I/O about this thing called Kotlin. It got me interested. I started to learn Kotlin, and now I have a job and I can provide for my family, right? And this, really, I think is more fulfilling than anything else that you could measure as a result of your work, in that you actually see that what you have done has positively impacted other people's lives.
Actually, one of the hardest things about this time was I was overly stressed, terribly stressed. And I didn't feel like... It felt like everything could fall apart at any moment. I didn't feel like Kotlin was really ready from the technical side. I didn't feel I was performing well enough. It was pretty terrible in terms of this tension and pressure and everything. And I remember before going to California, I just noticed that in the mornings I am sad every day. I don't want to go to work because of all the pressure. And so this moment, the announcement did help with that a little bit. But what helped even more was that Stephanie, being an incredibly nice person, arranged a series of meetings with Google engineers for me, I think right after a conference. I think so. Or maybe right before, I don't remember. But it was a whole day packed with meetings with high-profile Google engineers. And every person in every meeting told me how much they liked Kotlin. And, in the beginning, my imposter syndrome was like, okay, they're just saying nice things because they're nice people. There's also the American culture to say nice things all the time. And I wasn't believing. But then, talking engineer to engineer, you start going into technical details. And they were telling me about things they were playing with in Kotlin. And it was like very believable that they actually liked it. And by the end of the day, it was a very strong feeling that very good engineers actually liked what we did there. And this is when I felt much better. So all this pressure, all this tension, anxiety, and all this very hard work paid off. We did something that people actually like. It was a big relief. I remember I have this flashback memory of me walking outside of the office somewhere in Mountain View and thinking that, all these people can't be just nice. No, they do like it, for real.
And where do you see Kotlin in 10 years?
Oh, in 10 years, Kotlin is going to be multi-platform.
Here's how you can make a rotating donut in Kotlin. And what looks so magical all becomes clear once you understand the math behind it.
In January, the Kotlin multi-platform team updated the web wizard for multi-platform projects. Now you can easily add various popular libraries and Gradle plugins to a new project.
And what is the best feature of Kotlin?
Oh, it's no safety, of course. I mean, it's really reduces lots of bugs in your code, and it's what made Kotlin great, and it's still the great thing.
What's the coolest thing you ever developed in Kotlin?
A peer-to-peer payments integration.
We're working on the hardware terminal.
Yeah,
which is quite a unique opportunity.
Software for broadcasting, so that with Kotlin in production, so that's cool.
An app for frontline workers, so that every employee is connected to their company.
Android apps. I worked on SolarLearn, currently working in Klarna, or Klarna app.
It's just like a small recipe app I developed on my own in the beginning.
What's it called?
A cookie recipe.
I started by micromanaging a team of initially maybe 5 people, and then it grew to 30 something. And it was very difficult. And I was doing a job I didn't know how to do. And it required a lot of effort from me, and a lot of effort in like just overcoming this feeling of being incompetent all the time. So I felt fairly confident as an engineer and very inconfident as a manager. Over time, of course, I learned how to do management, but that took a big toll, and I got really, really tired and burned out over that. So I worked in Kotlin for 10 years, and it felt like a good point where I could, I did address all the management problems, or all the main management problems that we accumulated over the years, and everything was in relative order, and it felt like a good moment to just step aside and take a break. So this is what I did in 2020.
When Andre left, I was concerned, honestly. The industry is very oriented around programming languages that have had very stable long-term leadership, right? Guido van Rossum was involved in Python for decades. And, if you look at Ruby or, even Java, the Java leadership has been extremely stable over very long periods of time. And Kotlin, to me, it felt was still quite young. And suddenly Andre is leaving. And there wasn't really a clear explanation as to why, right? Was he tired of Kotlin? Did he no longer believe in it? Was it personal? It seemed like such a great position for him to be in.
The way we set everything up when I was leaving was a very, very smooth transition. So we had a decision-making procedure for the design, for everything, and it just kept going after I left. And then it evolved somehow without me. And I was not involved very much with anything, basically, after late 2020. And we do chat with people on the Kotlin team just socially, like these people. I worked with them for a long time. And I enjoy that, but they don't need me to keep Kotlin going.
I'm not sure that community was that much pushback when Andrew left, just because the new Roman Elizarov who stepped in, because Roman was already super famous for his coroutines contributions, and mostly coroutines, the way they are in the language now were his ideas.
10 years is a big time for a person to be on a single thing, so people get tired of doing. First off, it's not this, single project for the whole life person. So, I mean, sometimes you have to do something new. And my decision to leave was completely personal. I would have loved to continue working. I'm a different kind of person than Breslov. I can do lifetime projects, and I do have lifetime projects. I have projects that I've been working on more than 20 years of my life. But I mean, there was personal circumstances that forced me to leave.
So now people might ask about, okay, what's happening with you folks? Why you have the other lead also leaving? But yeah, Roman also had his reasons not connected with Kotlin. Yeah, and I think that now Kotlin is at the stage where the whole team of developers working, the whole team of people working, not only developers, but everyone is quite strong. And there are many very talented people. I'm not worried. I had some discussions with someone recently about it, but yeah, I'm on the side that is not worried about the future because just one or another person left.
My name is Yegor Tolstoy. I joined JetBrains in 2019 as a product manager, and I started in the Kotlin team. So I initially joined the Kotlin team. My work as a product manager was, if I want to describe it in one sentence, it is understanding what Kotlin developers need and what we must do for them in order to have success. Right now, I am managing the whole Kotlin team, which means that I'm still responsible for product management, but I'm also responsible for managing the team, processes, and delivery. When I joined, Kotlin was divided into smaller sub-teams, like a team that develop Kotlin native, Kotlin JVM, Kotlin JS, build tools, and other things. It's still the same, but at that time, each team decided what to work on mostly on their own. And that led to some unpleasant issues. For example, lots of different prototypes that were created by different teams, not supported by other teams, and not worked out. For example, when you create a new language feature, it's not enough to support it just in compiler. You have to also provide a great IDE support for it. Otherwise, it won't be convenient to use. When I joined, the teams were quite disconnected, and there were lots of such cases when a new feature is created and is not supported in tooling. I think we did really great in learning how to work together. So I can say that we became more from a very, very startup-like team, we became more enterprise-like team. It's quite hard to work on a startup mode, on a product that has millions of users who really, really rely on how stable it is. Before it, Kotlin was mostly JVM language. very tightly bounded to the JVM platform. Now, Kotlin multi-platform, which was a prototype when I joined, is like a fully featured product that is adopted by huge companies in the industry like Netflix, Square, Google, McDonald's, and other companies. And Kotlin is right now much more than just a JVM language. Many developers and companies literally share 100% or 80% of their code bases across Android, iOS, and backend. That's really awesome, and that's like an entirely new life for Kotlin. We really believe that our whole industry is flawed right now. Just think about it. Every company in the world hires a team of Android developers, a team of iOS developers, a team of front-end developers who essentially write the very same business logic. They just write it because at some point of time, different companies who hold these platforms decided that they want to have their own technical stack. That's like complete nonsense. That's so many human resources, so many people's lives thrown at literally nothing. What we believe is that Kotlin can become a language that bounds together different ecosystems and allows you not to write repetitive code once and once again. In that sense, we won't be just another new cross-platform solution, because there are tons of them, like, I don't know, React Native or Flutter, that are very great frameworks. We're unlike them. What those frameworks tell you? They tell you, hey, we're one more competing standard. You can just take Dart and write a beautiful Flutter application. Yes, you really can do it, but that's just the new ecosystem. What we are doing is we're designing Kotlin tooling and all frameworks in such a way that they will be very interoperable with different ecosystems, like Kotlin was in Java. Right now, it's the same. We're doing the same with Kotlin and iOS. We'll make Kotlin integration in existing iOS projects as smooth as possible. We believe that we will achieve the same in web with WebAssembly. We're making a huge bet on WebAssembly, and we believe that it will grow and Kotlin will be a major player there, and that it will also allow us to fulfill this dream on this front as well. So basically, that's our vision for the Kotlin right now is.
Looking back on the 10 years working on Kotlin, I can, I'm 100% sure it was a very good idea to actually work on this project. It was risky, it was wild, but it was a very good idea. So I'm really happy with how Kotlin turned out as a product. I think it helps a lot of people, and this is the ultimate goal of any product. I think I did learn a lot, and next time I do a big project, I will be doing it differently, and I will be hopefully much happier doing it. But I have no regrets in terms of should I have done it or not? I should have, and I'm happy I have.
It really reminds me of one of the comments that I received from a thought leader. They came to me one day and they had invited me to this conference. And they said to me that, come and speak at this conference, yeah, come and give a talk about Kotlin. And I did. I went, I gave a talk about Kotlin. And afterwards I said, so what do you think? And they said, I think JetBrains should stick to IDEs. Languages is not for them. And I said, but why? Well, because you do tooling. I said, but how is a language not a tool? Well, no, a language is different. Why? A language is a tool, period. That's all it is.